Steve Basic Architect here. Yeah, got my vibe board. Steve Basic Architect. You know that I'm a contributor on the Build Show. I'm also a co-host on the Unbuild It podcast. So just a few places you can find me. And I'm really digging our new tool here, the vibe board that we have in the studio, that I'm going to have the ability to give you presentations like this. So hopefully you enjoyed that first episode of PH11. We're going to dive into episode 2 here. Now, episode 2's format is a little different. It is all numbers. Yeah. You know, a lot of times people are always asking me, Steve, what's the numbers? How much did that cost? What's the square footage on that? You know, what was the airtightness number? All of these things. So before we dive into all of the details and drawings and such, I thought I would give you the metrics, physical metrics of the house, but also a bunch of the data that we have post-construction as far as, you know, airtightness levels and all of that good stuff. So now we can go into, you know, episodes 3 and beyond and have a full understanding of what the numbers are. So let's get started. So there we are, our PH11 house. It's out on the Cape, climate zone 5. And let's dive into some of these numbers. Oh, before we do, what a pretty picture. So there we go, first set of numbers, 1839, 1655, and 184. So the format is I'll put up the numbers and then I will have a second slide that actually tells you what it is. So 1839, it is the gross square foot of the house. 1655 is the net square foot of the house, which means that our exterior wall alone is 184 square feet. Now, we did a double wall construction here, so it's a 12-inch thick wall with a 2x6 exterior, 2x4 interior with a 3-inch space in between. So you can see that took up pretty much a bedroom in the house, just the exterior wall alone. 561, 773, 305. Any guess on what these numbers are? Yeah, that's the cost. Yeah, I know. Big surprise. Usually we don't give costs. This one's far enough along. The house has changed hands, so I don't have a problem talking about what the numbers were. Now, remember, these are 2011 numbers, right? That, or actually they're 2009 numbers because that's when we put it out to bid. Started construction in 2010. So, you know, 2009, we're talking 14 years ago, right, that this number's got on it. So things have changed a little in that 14 years, but that was the construction cost there. The other thing I want to call your attention to is, even though it was 305, you know, there's a lot of things in this house, custom cabinetry. The floors were resawn heart pine that, you know, certainly was not cheap. And the company that sawed up all the floors, they also made all of the stair parts for us. So there's, you know, a lot of that 305 is not necessarily the upgrades from code. If I was to give you a legitimate guess, we're probably somewhere between 10-11% of the construction cost of the house was energy grades themselves, energy upgrades from code. And also understand that's 2011, 14 years ago. Do you know how many passive houses were in the country? Probably somewhere around 4 to 6. I mean, this was one of the very first passive houses in the country, not in the state of Massachusetts, not in New England, in the country. So passive house was totally in its infancy. We were very fortunate to work with the builder on this project. It's in fact the Valley Group. They're out of the Cape and they're still down there, Christian Valley. And they did a superb job. And the fact that he took on this job, never having built much more than an Energy Star house was looking at, okay, I can build a passive house. I can meet those airtightness requirements. Our passive house consultant, this was the very first house he actually ever did passive house calculations on that was going to get built. So there's a lot of firsts to this project. And firsts means, you know, you're learning a lot. I certainly learned a lot on this project. So 7470 108. R value of the floor system, the wall system, and the roof system. So I lost my pen. All right. So, you know, these numbers, yeah, they are pretty high, certainly. But you also have to remember, like I just said on the last slide, this house was in its passive house infancy, right? It was pretty much alien to the building industry back in the time. The other thing that it was is, you know, passive house parameters came over here from Germany. Germany's probably like half the size of Texas, and was, I don't know, I mean, it's maybe 1 or 2 climate zones, right? In the US, we have 7 climate zones that are pretty extreme between them. And the problem early on with passive houses, they had a set of parameters that were, these are the parameters to build a house, not these are the parameters to build a house in this climate or climate zone. So the houses weren't quite tuned in the early days, and you couldn't use PV or solar hot water or any of these things to really offset some of the insulation values and such. It was strictly build a super insulated house, build it to a very good air tightness standard of 0.60, air changes at 50 pascals. But as time has gone through the 14 years that this thing was built in, right, in that 14 years since this has been completed, passive houses come to understand a lot of things. They learned a lot of things from the early houses, just as like I did, the builder did, the passive house consultant, right? There's stepping stone projects through the process. And now if we were to build this, you know, these numbers, they would probably be something like 70%. We just did a passive house literally down the street from this one using the prescriptive method, and its insulation levels are a little less than that, probably, yeah, 75% of these numbers. So there you go, a bunch of points and then some big numbers in the middle, 8.1, 6.2, and then, you know, these vary a little. These are slightly large variants here. These are pretty close, and these are relatively close. So let's see what those are. Yeah, so those are the numbers for the windows. Understand the top ones, south elevation, and then the bottom numbers are for these. So our SHGC goes up on that south elevation, and we can bring it down on the other elevations there. And you see, bringing that down, the R value goes slightly up on those other ones. Now, you'll see later in the presentation, you know, even though these are better, we probably have a lot more glass in that one elevation than we do in the other 3. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Surface area of 4 walls, surface area of floor and ceiling. So 4 plus 1 plus 1 equals 6 sides. Remember, when we're talking about passive house and the volume, it is all 6 sides. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides of the cube, right? So surface area, 6230. For those of you wondering, that's just a little larger than 194 sheets of plywood. Like how I did that math so quick? 32,388. Yeah, this is relative to the windows again. Notice 32% glass on the south elevation. The north, the east, and the west elevation, and these are percentage of glass against the whole wall area. All right, that should be area. Even the vibe board misspells my little scribble, but that's the whole wall area. So basically almost a third of the wall area on the south elevation is glass, and we're going to talk about why that's important to passive house in another slide or two, but just keep these numbers in the back of your head. 55. Now this is a really important number, especially in terms of passive house. Percentage of heat energy that comes through the windows. Through the windows, 55%. Do you know what that means? That means that 55% of your heating energy, heating the house, is free. As long as the sun comes up, your house gets heated, right? We have another house. I don't know what it is about this neighborhood. Maybe it's the water they drink or something, but I have a third passive house down the street from this one that we did a few years later. I'll do a series on that sometime later this year. But that one, the number rose up to, it's like 57 or 58%. But here we are in New England, and I know that homeowner. I've talked to him a number of times. He's a retired engineer, so numbers are his life. But he's living here in New England in a I think it's like 2,600 square foot house. His heating system doesn't even come on until about mid-January. And it shuts off about the first week of March. So he has somewhere around a 6, 7, on a bad winter, maybe an 8-week heating requirement from outside sources, right? Meaning that as long as the sun comes up, his house heats during the day, and then it cools off at night, drops down, and then the sun comes out and it heats back up. And like this house, 55% of that energy is the sun rising every day. 19,430. That's the volume of the house in cubic feet, right? That's if we took all 6 sides of that house. And it's not the volume of the attic because it's a vented attic, right? But if we took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? That 6-sided box, and we calculate the volume in there, we're at that 19,430. Now these are really some interesting numbers. I think I'm going to say that about every slide, but I don't know. I geek out over this stuff. Yeah, so these are our CFM 50 numbers. Right? And then those translate into, like 0.16, 0.25, a number of numbers. You'll see them coming up. But primary air barrier only. Now, one of the things about this house was the fact that zip system had just come on the market. Like, yes, passive house was in its infancy, but zip system was truly in its infancy. This was the very first house I ever used zip system on. And I wasn't sure on whether or not zip system was an effective air barrier. You know, like everybody today that's skeptical, oh, I wouldn't trust the tape, oh, this and that about tape. So being that our window manufacturer was absolutely horrible and lied about the delivery dates a number of times, and I can say that they're out of business, so it's not like I'm going to hurt them, probably for good reason. So what we were able to do was I talked the builder into building the zip greenhouse. We left one door we cut open, and that's where we put the blower door. So we had our primary air barrier intact, and then we tested the house. So 32 CFM 50 is the zip being our primary air barrier, right? Then we splashed 4 inches of closed cell foam against the inside of the zip, and that became our secondary air barrier. So we had zip here, and then we had our closed cell spray foam there, and you can see the number went down. We took out about 25% of a number that was already crazy. But then you can see these numbers, it went up. And the reason why these numbers went up is because we cut holes in our zip primary air barrier and we installed the windows. So I knew those numbers were going to go up, but it was really interesting to see as to what degree. And you can see the difference here between the 104 and the 116. The 104 was a depressurization. The 116 was a pressurization. Now, the difference is if I put a series of windows in a wall and I depressurize it, I'm sucking all of those casement windows against the weather stripping. Even a bad window is going to perform good because I'm enhancing the performance of the window by sucking it against the weather stripping. But the minute I have, that wall and with the weather stripping and I have the window, if I'm sucking it against it, then this gets nice and tight in here. But if I pressurize and I push it out, then this is wanting to push out and develop some air leakage. So the way you really test the window is test it both ways. You do a negative pressure test, but then you turn the blower door around and pressurize the house to ensure that all of the seals of the windows are in fact successful. And there it is. There's just a quick picture. We did 4 blower door tests. Like I said, we did the primary air barrier, the secondary air barrier, a negative on the windows, a positive on the windows, and then we came up, the final blower door number for passive house is the average of the negative pressure test and the positive pressure test. But I wanted to show you, we used a theatrical fogger. So we basically filled the house up, and you can see there's our red door of truth or blower door, and you can see I took a picture of the manometer. Yes, that's 25 CFM at 50 pascals. That's our secondary and our primary air barrier at work there. But notice here, there's no windows cut in. It is a big green box. Oh, not going to do it. So, I used to tease the people at Zip that we did a full-scale model using your material, and then we tested it in real life. So, and there's the numbers. You can guess what these are. Yes. So the 32 CFM 50 translates to 0.16. So that's how the Zip tested out. Zip as the primary. When we added the closed cell spray foam, we dropped down to 0.12. We went from 32 to 25, and we were at 0.12. Then we installed the windows. This is the negative test. This is the positive test, right? Obviously the number's a little higher there. It goes up in number, 5.1 to 5.7, and our target was 0.60. And you can see if I average those numbers, I come out to 0.54. And that was our final number on that, and that is sub, sorry about that, and that is sub the 0.60. Just looking to advance this. There we go. So, what do those numbers translate to? That 32 CFM50, I like red better. That 32 CFM50 translates to 2.9 square inches, right? And that is, remember, that is total leakage over the, what was it, 6,900 square feet of total surface area, the 194 sheets of plywood. So imagine this, you put down 194 sheets of plywood, and the cumulative air leakage for the primary air barrier is literally around 3 inches by 1 inch. Over 195 sheets of plywood. Look at this. The minute we did the secondary closed cell spray foam, there, we went down to 2.3. So we took that and we made it even smaller. But then we cut in the windows, 9.5, 10.6, and then our goal was no larger than 11. But we were right here, roughly about 10 inches. So again, if I drew this, we're probably talking an area about that big, literally. And that against 194 sheets of plywood. And we've done houses much tighter than that, but this was the very first one that I ever did. But astonishing numbers. So imagine that you're in this house, 2,000 square foot, and the largest cumulative leakage area is about 10 square inches. .88 kilowatts at peak performance. We needed to meet net zero. We only had a certain amount of roof area on this house. We could only put 2.8 kWp. I'm not quite sure. The energy consultant gave me these numbers in kWp. But regardless, we're at roughly 71% of the net zero requirement with this house, right? And that's, keep in mind, that's only putting up a 2.8 system. I would venture a guess the panels we put up here were probably something like 260 watts, give or take. The panels we just put on our Build Show Build Boston house were something like 400 plus, 425, something like that. So just imagine if we put those on in the same area, we would probably meet that number and be able to get this to 100% in today's. But you know, that's the important of a presentation like this, is understanding where we were, what we did, why we did it, and how everybody is learning and coming together in the industry as we move forward, so that if we rebuilt this house today, yes, it would have cost more, but our airtightness number would probably be better because we have a better understanding of it. But also, the manufacturers are building better stuff. This is just a quick site plan. Notice here, right? This is south, east, and west, and you can see the house here. So if I translate that you can see north is pretty much just like that. So we're just slightly off skew of that house for south facing too. So it's not quite perfect. We actually sited the house for some views, not necessarily for premium solar access. So, you know, sometimes you have to juggle it a little bit, give a little to, you know, get a little in a different direction. So we opted for some of the views rather than rotating the house. And keep in mind, you know, we do have the house. We talked about this in the first video, and we also have an accessory garage there that's kind of doing some cool things, but I figured we'd include that as part of the project to talk about too. So there you have it. A presentation about the numbers, right? Nothing but the numbers. You ask for numbers, there you go. Whole presentation about the numbers. If you're looking for me more, you can find me at Steve Basic Architect on Instagram, Steve Basic on LinkedIn, Steve Basic Architect on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube, which hopefully you're watching right now. Tell all your friends, smash that subscribe button. I'll write it here so you don't forget. Smash that subscribe button. And also, I have a lot of great stuff happening on the Build Show. I'm a contributor there. I have probably 200 plus videos there of all different aspects of construction. Sometimes we're talking about shear connectors at garage doors. Other times we're talking about basement insulation or the electrical panel or a ventilation device or a really cool tile system that we're using in a shower. But go check out those videos. Tell all your friends about it. If you're into podcasts, you know, I joined my friends Peter Yost and Jake Bruton on the Unbuilded podcast. The three of us are on that podcast. Peter is a building science nerd type that is one of the smartest guys I know. Don't tell him I said that. He won't watch this, so I don't have to worry about it. Jake Bruton, exceptional builder that I do a bunch of work with down in Columbia, Missouri. And of course, me being the architect of the group, we have building scientist, builder, and architect. So we all have slightly different views on the different building topics we talk about. Of course, I'm Steve Basic Architect, and a big thanks to my friends at the Vibe Board, and that now I can bring my knowledge to you. So until next time, you know what I'm going to say. Long live our building.